dealing with average folks, normal folks, people who live normal lives out there in the normal world. One part of it, I think, is what I said, that they're not going to give their time and energy and emotional commitment to something which seems futile. And you don't overcome that feeling of futility by pointing out how bad the thing that we're opposing is. Right? It doesn't address the feeling of futility. The feeling of futility is the possibility of an alternative and the possibility of attaining it. But there's another thing, I think, that keeps what I suspect you mean by normal folks, which is folks who have normal working class jobs out of the movement. And that's that the movement is often anti-working class. The movement embodies in itself, in the early movement, women came into the movement, the black community came into the movement and said, in both cases, the movement is a wretched mess. If the movement is internally as bad as Jim Crow racism, as bad as Playboy or Hustler, then the movement is hypocritical. The movement is incapable of addressing those issues. The movement can't win. And they said, basically, the movement has to renovate itself. It has to address its internal sexism, its internal racism. And we've been doing it for decades. We haven't solved it completely, but there's been a whole lot of progress, I think, it's fair to say. But if you look at the class dimension, it hasn't even come up as an issue, really. And so, you asked about the New York Times. So the New York Times masthead says it's all the news that's fit to print. What does that mean? All the news that's consistent with reproducing the system on behalf of the elites. And of course, leftists read the New York Times every day for 2 or 3 hours. Then they laugh at and ridicule people who read the Daily News. But the people who read the Daily News, by and large, read the sports section. The one part of the newspaper that tells the truth. So the foolish working people are reading the only thing in the newspaper that tells the truth. Meanwhile, we are devotedly, slavishly reading the people who we say are the worst scuzzballs on the planet, manipulating and lying to us. What's going on there? Why is McDonald's atrocious, but a rich, fancy restaurant isn't? Why are sports things that we don't pay any attention to? Why is being religious despicable? Why is, and on and on and on, you can really list a lot. I think it's because we have movements which are, it's not, we don't have to beat ourselves on the head about it, but we have movements which embody the values of Harvard, not the values of a working class pub. Our movements try to aspire to be like Yale Law School more than they aspire to be a place where normal people will be empowered and will be comfortable and will be able to take self-manage and it has nothing to do with intelligence, right? What we've tried to make clear is that the intelligence of the population dwarfs the intelligence of the people at Harvard. There might be plenty of brain power at Harvard, but there isn't a lot of smarts, right? All right, I'll give you one embarrassing example of this. In 1969, we had a meeting. We were going to attack the instrumentation labs, which was a laboratory that was doing horrendous technological stuff around the war. It was making MIRVs. It was making smart bombs. It was doing all sorts of stuff. And we had a meeting. You know, it might have been in this room. I think it was in this room. With all the employees of the iLabs and the movement folks on the campus to try and hash out what was going to be a gigantic cataclysm because we were going to attack them. We were going to attack the iLabs. And on the day when we attacked the iLabs, the city was militarized because it was a military base. So we're having this meeting. And this was probably the worst moment in my left career, I suppose you could say. At one point, I just said something like, I can't remember it exactly, we're going to be your employers. And that was the heart of the problem, right? It was that the movement understands itself as being doctors, lawyers, engineers, managers, administrators. That's how we see that's who we identify with. I've gone to campuses in a room just about like this, 300 or 400 people, more than this. It's worth telling. I tell this story over and over again. At Penn State College in Pennsylvania. Does anybody know what the football team is at State College in Pennsylvania? You're all leftists. Nobody's going to know. Anyway, football in that town is the lifeblood of the town. The stadium has 60,000 seats. It's full every weekend. The city has 60,000 citizens. It is simply full. So I'm joking before the session starts with the 400 radicals in the room, and I say, how many of you have been to a football game? And 3 hands go up. And then I say to people, I passed a sports bar on the way over here. A sports bar in State College, Pennsylvania is a big bar that is full of huge people. I'm not kidding. You look in the door and they're big. And I said, how many of you have gone into the sports bar and have talked to people about politics, about war and peace, about sexism, about racism? And now everybody's laughing and rolling on the floor, and they're in hysterics. And then I said, you think you're leftists, but you're not. And then we had a good discussion. I said, you might as well go to the beach, because what you're telling me is that you won't talk to, that you're afraid of, and that you are dismissive of the entire constituency of the community of which you are a part. You ask what people on the left watch. It's all the same, it's The Simpsons. There's a few TV shows, but nothing that anybody else watches, right? So what I'm saying is our movement, in the same way that to make a movement that blacks didn't feel like it was worse than the world, or women didn't feel like it was worse than the world, to do that, we have to take seriously race and gender as it plays out in people's personal behavior, personal attitudes, personal values, the way they treat one another, and the structure of the movement. We have movements that replicate the structure of corporations. We have movements whose internal structure is the only difference between them and a corporation is that we're just smaller. We don't have as many assets. Working people can pick it up. They can feel it. It's not their place. That's why they don't relate. The last thing, or that's why I think they don't anyway.